Yeah, record on this computer.
Okay, hi, welcome to FedEx. My name's Lee, I'm from Sydney.
Hi there, welcome to FedEx. I'm Emmanuel, I'm in Israel right now.
Hi, welcome to FederationX. I'm Rebecca, and I'm in New York right now.
Right, it's really good to be back on the show, guys. It's a lot's happened since we spoke last, and I've been following your videos. Emmanuel, given you're in Israel, and Rebecca, given you're very active in the Jewish community in New York, I think both your perspectives are invaluable. So I'd like to ask you guys some questions. And obviously, 7/10 was a major event and a tragedy. Do you remember getting the news? And what were you doing when you heard? And what was your reaction, Manuel?
Well, first of all, it started with an air raid alarm from incoming rockets, which is actually quite rare. That was only because we're located in probably we're farthest away from the south and farthest away from the north. So we very, very rarely get alarms. That's the way it started, and then it started to filter slowly during the day. Because originally, we just knew about the rocket attacks. We didn't know about the ground incursions. Only during the day it started to develop, and it started very slowly to develop. And so it was like it didn't come like a huge shock because it started, it was gradually developing into the huge thing it became. And as it came along, as it went along, I started to understand that this is way bigger than it started out to be. So I wasn't surprised very much. I wasn't surprised altogether because I expected something of the sort, not maybe necessarily exactly that kind of operation, but certainly blowing the whole thing blowing up. I expected that already for quite a while.
I imagine, given the size of Israel, the country started to slowly grind to a halt. Is that fair? If something like that was happening in Sydney, and we've had major events over the years in my lifetime, the whole city slowly grinds to a halt, and everybody's just keen for more and more news and information. Is that how?
I wouldn't say that. No, I think we're used to events happening which are of that kind of a nature. So everybody's getting organized. Actually, what happened is that everybody who is in reserve duty started to get his act together and went to the front lines. Okay, so even before the army started to put out the drafting notices, there was no grinding to a halt. Everybody was getting ready for the war. Also, of course, there was a lot of worry that the war would start from the north as well, and that would have been terrible had it started full blast from the north. Fortunately, in the north, it only started to wind up very, very slowly, and it's still not fully active.
Yeah,
but we don't know what's coming from there.
There is talk of. I was reading yesterday that Netanyahu has said that it's inevitable there'll be a war with Lebanon. But
I don't think war. I don't think war is ever inevitable. I'm pretty sure that a lot of effort is being spent not to make it happen, because that would basically likely be. I just talked to Rebecca before, and I said that'll be the end of Lebanon, okay, as we know it. If you look at Gaza the way it looks now, think of Beirut.
Yeah, yeah, I don't imagine that Israel will get off lightly if as lightly as they have on Gaza. If they did that to Lebanon, I think the international community would be outraged.
Well, it depends what Hezbollah does. You know, if Hezbollah starts using all his weapons to sing, then I mean, Lebanon is supposedly a sovereign state.
Yeah.
If Lebanon can't control Hezbollah, it'll have to take the price.
Rebecca, do you remember what you were doing in New York
Yeah.
when you heard the news?
Well, I was actually in New Jersey, so I heard the news by reading it online, and I was like, "Oh my God!" First of all, I was like, "Oh my God," and I felt horror.
What was the what was your family's?
I also felt like they were horrified, of course, at 10/7. And they're like, well, Hamas just showed what it actually is.
Right.
A terror group.
Yeah. And so at that stage, did you see a change in attitude? Because you're Reformed Jewish and generally rather liberal. Did that impact at all on your view of the conflict?
Well, I would say different people are doing different things. Like there are always going to be a couple of people in groups like Jewish Voice for Peace who would never show any or hardly any sympathy for Israel. But even Jewish Voice for Peace in its statement talking about it's a tragedy for everyone, Palestinians and Israelis. Then it talked about how Israel's policies brought this on. That was the Jewish Voice for Peace statement, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then there were people, and this really scared a lot of American Jews, people who thought that 10/7 was a glorious act of resistance, or were otherwise apologists for Hamas.
Right.
And there were people who were fairly prominent, not particularly connected to Palestinian culture, who bought into the anti-colonial framework that really erases a lot of what Jews are.
Was that immediate?
What their connection to the land is? Yeah.
Was that immediate? Or
is what immediate?
Was that attitude expressed immediately after 7/10, or did it come after the invasion of Gaza or the bombing of Gaza?
Some of it was right after 7/10.
Right.
Some of it was. Although the press overall had a brief period of, say, a few days where it was a lot more sympathetic to Israel.
Yeah.
And the discussions on social media overall were a lot more sympathetic to Israel. Of course, there were still a significant number of people who were apologists for 10/7, but a greater number of people had shifted towards being more Israel sympathetic very briefly. It did not last.
Manuel, was there anybody in Israel? I guess they probably wouldn't have the courage to express it. Was there anybody in Israel, or was there any even minor movement of what did you expect? We had this coming type attitude about 7/10?
There were individuals who said that, but not many said it out loudly. I
Sure.
think there is a considerable part of the of people who knew that, felt like I did, that this was coming.
Yeah.
I went over some of the articles I wrote over time, and I found one from 2014, which was like, it was yesterday. It was unbelievable, for 10 years ago,
Yeah.
So people have been, whoever thought who could leave a pot on the fire like Gaza without attending to it for 10 years and expect that it won't blow, it's just ridiculous. It's difficult to make that statement because even some people got into trouble for saying that that there is some kind of responsibility also on our side. Okay, but that's the ways, when there's a war going on, everybody huddles together and they're all in favor.
So what's your some news started to come out probably a month after the event that Israel was warned by its security services that this was coming, and they knew that something like this was in the wind. Did you hear about that?
No, at the time I don't think anybody knew about that. Now after that it happened, more and more things are being published, and there appears to be clear evidence that the army knew about it or should have known about it from reports that were provided. But what also is clear that they didn't give it the credence they should have. For whatever reason, and that will have to be determined in the Commission of Inquiry. There's already one which is gearing up from the state's ombudsman, but there hasn't been an official Commission of Inquiry. Has not been appointed has to be appointed by a Supreme Court judge. That hasn't happened. The government has to decide on it, and the government is not pushing it for the time being.
Yeah, they're going to wait.
Not surprisingly.
Yeah.
One of the movements we saw. So then you get the bombing of Gaza, and you're right. I think world opinion was certainly in favor of Israel for a few days. I know in Sydney, the Harbour Bridge was lit up with the Israeli colours, and the Opera House was lit up, and I think every famous landmark in the world that happened. I saw the news of the Eiffel Tower displaying the Israeli colors, and Big Ben displaying the Israeli colors, and I think it did drum up a lot of sympathy for Israel. Then the bombing started in Gaza, and I think that started to detract almost immediately from the sympathy. And I get the impression, and you can tell me if this is right, and I've heard that Israeli news doesn't give that side of the story. Most Israelis were getting these consistent sympathy. This is our 9/11. We need to do something about it.
Oh, absolutely. The news are completely one-sided.
Right.
All the regular news channels. You see the damage to Gaza every once in a while through the eyes of the Israeli soldiers. They show Israeli soldiers, and in the background you see Gaza destroyed.
Yeah.
But you don't have a report on it, and every once in a while a picture goes in. But there's no widespread reporting on what the actual damage is. Here and there you hear numbers, but again, it's most of the TV news are they show you what's happening today, where the army is, how the negotiations about the hostages are going, and then they show stories of individuals who survived the massacres of the attack. The individual stories of heroism of either guys who fought the attack, or of civilians who survived the attack, and individual stories one after the other in every newscast. So
did you? Sorry, would the average Israeli have known that the devastation that was being wreaked on Gaza at that time?
Well, at what time?
Say within 2 weeks of 7.
Anybody who wants to know would have known.
Sure.
But if you stick to Israeli TV, you wouldn't know.
Right.
And people didn't take the casualty numbers, for example. Okay, the casualty numbers very quickly went up to 20,000 and even higher than that. And there was widespread incredulity. Okay, people didn't believe it, even though the Hamas health ministry has been pretty consistently on the button with the casualty numbers from previous events. So we know that. Okay, but actually, I was on Australian TV, and people asked me on Sky TV.
I think I saw it. Yeah.
And they asked me about the casualty numbers, and I told them that's the numbers.
Yeah.
Okay. So Israelis don't like to hear the numbers, not surprisingly.
What about in the States? Did they was the media? I remember hearing that 3 of the Muslim hosts on MSNBC were taken off, and Mehdi Hassan, probably the most prominent. Rebecca, were both sides being reported in the US?
There was report from Israel. There was report from Gaza, but it did seem that reporters had difficulty of access to Gaza. But people were talking about, well, especially regular people, not news media, but regular people, different prominent Gazans they knew that were being killed. And see why the reporting would be so spotty from Gaza. It is a war zone.
Yeah. Also, Israel.
A lot of Gazans that I know, I don't seem to be able to reach. Israel, what?
Israel, well,
yeah, they're
not letting any journalists in, and all the media that was AP, Reuters, and Al Jazeera being destroyed in previous attacks. So
yeah,
it's pretty hard to get anything out of Gaza. I heard
there are also incidents of killing journalists.
Yeah, 110. I think
there,
I heard
yeah.
that number. And there's a guy. There's a Gazan that's a journalist that you see constantly. A little chubby guy with a press vest who had his whole family killed, and he's been targeted, but he hasn't been killed. His cameraman was killed, I believe. And I remember somebody asking about him. And the guy that was being asked, I can't remember who it was, could have been Norman Finkelstein, but he was saying, if he wasn't Palestinian, he would be on the front cover of Time magazine, given the fact that he survived and survived his whole family being killed. And one of the stories that he put out was when he was told his house is bombed, and he rushed over there and saw his family killed, and then the trauma of recognizing his daughters and his wife, and so he became the story. But I guess there's a lot of that there. There's there was also a movement of Jewish Americans who protested in Grand Central Station, from memory. Do you remember that?
Yes, they said things like "not in my name."
Yes.
and Ceasefire Now. That was Jewish Voice for Peace, which is probably the most prominent American Jewish anti-Zionist group.
Right.
And yeah, so there are enough of them to make a showing to show their numbers in Grand Central Station. Jewish Voice for Peace rallies in New York City tend to be a lot smaller, I believe, than pro-Israel rallies, just because of the relative numbers of people who would this vocally support these things. I also think that a lot of the anti-Zionist Jews or non-Zionist Jews are relatively quiet about it, partly because the communal life can be very Zionist. Not always, but can be. Partly because they are the people who tend to be more disaffiliated. More disaffiliated with Jewish communal life. Jewish Voice for Peace, supposedly in recent years, it took a turn to being more overtly Jewish. They have like celebrations of Jewish holidays and Shabbat and prayers and a rabbinical council and things like that. For a lot of the members, these things are new to them, even if they may have grown up nominally Jewish.
The if we move forward a little bit, you then had and probably just before Christmas, you had reports of the Schaefer Hospital siege was probably one of the major milestones in the conflict. How was that reported on, Manuel, if at all, in Israel?
Oh, it was clearly reported that Schaefer Hospital was a hotbed of Hamas activity, and that under the hospital there are tunnels, and Hamas is hiding there, and that they found in the hospital and around the hospital a lot of weaponry, and the gist of it at the time, it was hyped pretty highly. It pretty soon died down a little because apparently it was overplayed, overhyped, and while there was obviously some evidence of Hamas military activities in and around the hospital, it wasn't quite at the level as the army tried to make it out to be from the beginning.
I remember a moment when Prime Minister Ehud Barak was being interviewed, and
former Prime Minister.
Prime Minister, yeah. Sorry, we call them Prime Minister regardless of whether they're
okay, sorry.
Just a courtesy. So he was being interviewed, and somebody had asked him on British television, I think it was the BBC, and somebody had asked him, so how are you so sure there's tunnels under there? He said, well, we built them.
Yeah,
we were young in the 80s, and we built them, so we know they're there. And
that was an interesting tidbit, which most of the Israelis didn't know, apparently.
Yeah, and it was a turning point, I think, in the propaganda war. So people became more critical of any news that was coming out of Israel. And then you had the diary calendar that was reported to be a Hamas list of personnel that were going to be on guard, a roster, Hamas roster, and it turned out it was just a calendar with Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday written in Arabic.
Well, our reporting is completely unreliable. Also, the army spokesman is also not so reliable as it used to be. It's not so much his own fault, but he gets the information from the units, and the units don't always tell the truth.
Right.
So you have to be skeptical about everything.
Would that have because my sense is that a very large majority of Israelis believe everything the government puts out. Is that a fair assumption?
Let's say a large part of the population believe a large part of what the government puts out. Yes.
Okay.
But there is criticism. It's beginning to. I think over time the number is going down because it's been proven more and more that many of the things are not correct or not quite correct or not totally correct.
Yeah.
But there's a problem there because some of the things you want to hear then, you like to hear that kind of reporting, so you're not as critical about it as you should be.
Yeah. And there's a sense of almost being justified that what we're doing is the right thing, and that sort of reporting plays into that paradigm, I guess.
Absolutely. This is a just war. We're kicking them back for the attack that attacked us.
Yeah.
And there's an element of revenge, no doubt.
Yeah. And I imagine that feeling of revenge would have been heightened very much after 7/10, and something that the politicians in Israel played on.
Sure. No, only after, no, that the revenge is as a result of 7/10, because 7/10 hit us where it hurt most. The civilian population, women, and all kinds of elements which rang memories from a long time ago, regardless of how much it was comparable or not. Okay, but people made sure to play it that way.
Did you get data like 85% of homes have been destroyed, that after being told to move south along what was termed a humanitarian corridor, that they were being attacked on their way going south?
I heard I heard one instance of such an event where people were taught to go south and then they were attacked on the way, but that probably occurred or was a mistake or something like that. But I can't imagine that was something planned. So this is the kind of thing that happens in war.
Rebecca, did you see a mood change generally in what was being reported and people's views of the conflict a few weeks into the conflict in the States?
Yes. I would say the press was mixed. For example, Huffington Post was a lot more sympathetic to the Palestinians than Wall Street Journal. In general, although it's not true absolutely, media that had a reputation for being more conservative were more sympathetic towards Israel. Media that had a reputation for being more liberal were more sympathetic towards the Palestinians. But people were fairly skeptical of the war. Israel didn't seem to have a lot of good options because if it does go into Gaza and try some nation building, what happens? This is something that Americans have done before, and it has not worked out for us in this region. Whereas if Israel just ignores it, or has a quote unquote light response, that looks weak. So,
what was there a point? Sorry, with the was it within the Jewish community? Was there also a change in attitude, or were they steadfastly pro-Israeli, the attacks and the
a change in I think that there is a gap overall between the Jewish community and other groups in America that would otherwise have a similar political leaning. The right of America, the Christian right that supports Israel's military, is still behind Israel. They're still back in Israel. They haven't flinched. But on the left, people outside of the Jewish world are more likely to be like, "What are you doing, Israel?"
There was also
And,
a lot of criticism of Biden not doing anything about the other than platitudes. You know, we've asked Israel to calm down, and we've asked Israel. I'd hate to be Biden over the last 2 months, because I imagine he was being pulled from pillar to post by very polar sides of the conflict.
I think there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes which we aren't aware of. But some of them, I think he's doing some tough things to Israel which aren't publicized. They're slowly leaking out. But there have been a few individuals have been sanctioned, and there's actually apparently an open threat to sanction the Minister of National Security. Okay, so that's not something to trifle with. Not to talk about slowing down the ammunition deliveries, which is hasn't happened, but it's being, you know, apparently being discussed. So I think if we don't come around pretty soon, America will start to use more strong arm tactics. I mean, just the presence of Blinken at almost every meeting of the cabinet is, you know, that by itself is already something.
It's funny listening to, you know, where they get the White House journalists and a speaker on behalf of the government, and the journalists get to pound questions. That Washington press corps, those questions, you could see the stress in the faces of the American, because some of those questions they just can't answer. So I think it's generally it's a really tough game of diplomacy at the moment for the Americans, not knowing which way to go. And I imagine you're right. I think everyone believes that there is talks going on in the background, and they are reasonably confidential, and it's frustrating because the spokesman can't say that's going on because they are confidential talks. Yet that's what I think most of the people want to hear.
This is Jason. Incidentally, there was a watershed event today, which I think it's a major event if people pick up on it. There was, you know that right now Palestinians are not allowed to work in Israel.
Yeah,
the Palestinian workers.
That was
and they're still allowed to work in the occupied territories for Israel.
Okay.
Okay. Now there's an industrial zone in the near Ma'ale Adumim, which has about 2,000 Palestinian workers, and they came to work in the morning, and the check post there where they have to check through didn't process them fast enough, or there weren't enough people there. Anyway, they simply stormed the check post and went to work. Okay. And the guards there didn't do anything. They understood that they can't stop them.
Wow.
Now, okay, now that is such a powerful thing. If they would only do that somewhere else, because when they do that, there's nothing we can do. Okay, and I was so happy that the guards didn't do something stupid.
Yeah,
you know?
Because that's always a danger, isn't it?
Of course. But even if they would have, you can't do something when you're two or three guards. You can't do something with 2,000 workers. Okay, So
It reminds
so-
me, I got images of the Berlin Wall coming down and
yeah, something like that. Yeah. So I'm going to write an article on that.
that's really,
So
yeah, I'd love to read it. There's probably, we can't cover everything. We don't have enough time, but there's two more events I want to cover. One is the towards the end, or sorry, it's not nowhere near the end yet, but not long ago, Benjamin Netanyahu was talking about reoccupying Gaza. Well, he wasn't directly, but there was talk about, and he was not talking it down. He was promoting it, saying that you know, Hamas can't go back in to Gaza, and we can't have a two-state solution, and I'm not letting Abbas take over Gaza. So the natural repercussions of that are that, you know, Israel's going to go in and occupy Gaza again. And Biden was saying with a certain degree of certainty that there was this was the time to start talking about a two-state solution, as America normally does. And for 15 years, Netanyahu's been saying we're not going to have two states, and America has been, so it's almost been like used as a stall tactic for the status quo. This time, though, Netanyahu has become far more brazen and openly said we're not going to go in for a two-state solution. What's your view on that, and what's Israelis' view on that? I remember, sorry, and just before you answer, Emmanuel, I saw one of the Corey Gilchester Ask Project talks, and just about everybody in Israel that he asked what the solution was said a two-state solution. You know, we should give them their land and let them go off there.
when was that film taken? Have a look.
Okay, because it was released. Yeah, you're right. I didn't check the date that it was, but it was only appeared in my feed about 2 weeks ago.
Okay, this may be anecdotal. I don't know. The most recent polls on, and they were already after the 7th of October, and they were not much different from before 7th of October.
That's interesting.
Okay, both indicate less than 30%, about 30% in favor of a two-state solution among the Palestinians and among the Israelis. Okay, that's now, if anything, the 7th of October made the situation worse. Okay, because people, I don't want a Palestinian, you know, look, I have Gaza here, I don't want a Palestinian state. Okay, so from that point of view, likelihood is, I don't think many people believe there will be a two-state solution. You know, as long as Netanyahu is around. Also, the opposition is not in favor of a Palestinian state. Okay, I think that the biggest problem is that everybody is focused on a two-state solution, which is quite obvious to most people who talk about it, is very unlikely to happen. Okay, but there has to be something else. We can't leave the status quo, and we're not talking about something else. This is the biggest problem. Okay, this is the biggest problem, that nothing else is being discussed. So, you know, I'm of course pushing the Federation.
It's almost like somebody will come up with something when we're ready. We're just not ready to talk about it.
Yeah, that's something like that. It's just now the Americans are pushing the two-state solution, which is, you know, so people are saying, okay, let them talk. You know, it's a little bit scary because the Americans can actually make it happen, or can try to make it happen and force it on the situation. But I don't think the situation is ready for a two-state solution.
And so that's the view outside of Israel is that really Biden holds the trump card, and I think people by association then suggest that America is as much to blame for the devastation if they're pro-Israeli as Israel is. which is putting America in jeopardy, I guess, from an international perspective. Well, you saw that with the Hutus and the shooting.
The Houthis, yeah.
What's the view in the States? Have you noticed, Rebecca, that this has created a polar shift in attitude, so that there's no middle ground anymore? I get the sense there is no middle ground, or the people that used to be moderates have moved to one side or the other as a result of the conflict.
Yes and no. I would say a lot of people have moved one side or the other. I think more fear than there was. I think there's more mistrust than there was, but at the same time, interestingly enough, there is, and you probably noticed this with your space, I noticed this with my space, we noticed this with our spaces, there's a heightened interest in peace building. There is more of a sensitivity. People now know that, now see it as a more existential issue. And so the people who really want to do the peace building now have more resources to do it.
Right.
Because people are reminded of it. But the question is, will peace building actually happen at the level of the ground as opposed to just being larger peace building circles? I think what it would require is international pressure. The parties on the ground are really aggravated right now. But at the same time, this is a strategic region, and it's important for a lot of people, the United States, for example, to keep it quiet. The Houthis were disrupting international trade. And so that's one example. People start to be hurting when there's war. And so will the international community step in and get the Israelis and the Palestinians to the negotiating table? Maybe so. Maybe Israel will realize that the PA is as good as it can do, and it's somebody to work with. And they shouldn't just
the general
step on
feeling,
it all the time.
The general feeling that I get in the general media and also from my space is that it's the just as much the Palestinians that will reject the PA in Gaza as the Israelis. So the PA's hasn't gained much credibility with the Palestinian people. In fact, it's lost a lot of ground. They see it as corrupt and the leaders looking after their own self-interest, not dissimilar to the Israeli government.
It may get more credibility if it showed meaningful ability to move the Israeli public to give Palestinians more freedom.
That's yeah, that's an interesting it's an interesting nuance. I actually heard Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks is running for president. Apparently, he's one of the dark horses, and his major platform is the Israel-Palestine conflict. Now, whether that's more for the publicity, and I suspect that's what it is, than he actually believes he's got a chance. But he made the comment that if the Palestinian people could see that the PA has delivered a state to them, then that's going to improve their image amongst the Palestinian people.
Yes, yes. On the other hand,
It's
some
unlikely gonna
may
happen.
still give Hamas the credit for lighting the spark that hits the tinder.
They deserve the credit. They deserve the credit. If anything moves, it's because of what Hamas did. Nothing else.
Yeah.
Yeah. But at the
sadly,
same time, Israel feeling like it has a partner in the PA also helps get it to move. It's like a game of good cop, bad cop. The PA, the
yeah, but
security collaborator is
Israel
good cop.
Israel doesn't feel at all that the PA, at least not the government, okay? The fact that their security cooperation doesn't do it. The government is dead set against the PA and doesn't see it as a partner, doesn't see it as anything. That's why the government is also against the PA's participation in the reconstruction of Gaza, which was ridiculous.
Yeah,
they will have to go back on that anyway.
And one of the things that Netanyahu, and I think he's using it as a way of maybe cushioning the blow, is saying some of the other Arab states could help in the reconstruction, suggesting that someone like Saudi Arabia would step in and take sovereignty over Gaza.
Well, nobody will step in if the Palestinian Authority isn't part of it in some way.
Yeah, one of the there's a gentleman that's the UK ambassador to the Palestinians, who has appeared a lot in the news. Zohar, I think his name is, and extremely well spoken and very articulate and
the PA ambassador to the United Kingdom. Yes.
And you sort of get the sense if the PA were all like him, it might actually work. But
work out,
So one final thing is that the ICJ, which is still ongoing. The view is that one of the skeptical things about the UNRWA connection to Hamas is that it came the day after the ICJ verdict on the injunction came out, which was really not much of a verdict. I don't think they said you're not allowed to commit genocide. They didn't actually say you are committing genocide or you're in danger of doing it.
No, they didn't make a clear determination. They just made it plausible that there may be a genocide going on, and that's why you should do this and this and this and this to follow up.
What's the view in Israel? Is it like, and again, I get the sense that it's more, it's like, of course the UN are going to say that they're a racist, anti-Semite organization.
The general feeling is that everybody's against us, and so is the ICJ. But there's a realization that it's very, very bad for us publicity-wise.
Right. Okay.
That whatever, regardless right or wrong, this is a big hit, a big hit. Okay. So and the fact that we're cooperating is an indication how big it is. Okay, we are cooperating with the ICJ. We're responding to the things that we have been requested to respond to, and there's a general feeling of this is not good. Okay, so regardless of whether we think they're all anti-Semites or not, it's not good. Okay, so. So this UNRWA thing is actually, it came as a surprise to me, although UNRWA has been in the bad books for a long time. They have a lot to answer to. This is an organization which has been whatever good it has done a lot of bad things too. Also, not only in terms of corruption and supporting Hamas in this or that way, but also in providing, education, which is very problematic to Palestinian children.
There's a human element to just about any organization that lends itself to corruption. I remember seeing a documentary on the slave trade in and the UN's fight against, and they've sent somebody into one of the African countries. They set up a whole department, one of the African countries, that was to take testimony of people that have been captured and used as slaves in in prostitution generally. And a lot of the prostitutes' clients were these UN
Yeah. There's a problem. The UN is not necessarily the great outfit it would like us to think it is.
Well, UNRWA, it also operates in some very corrupt places. Like, I mean, if there's a Palestinian refugee camp somewhere, that place is not too great of shakes, probably. And so that's where the UNRWA operates. These places have a lot of corruption in general. They have problematic curricula in general. UNRWA teaches the host country's curricula, which is part of the problem. And also international and other NGO organizations that operate in those areas, they have to, at some level, toe the line of the party in order to basically be there at all.
And I think
and the press too.
That's probably the big factor that define what's going on. If you're going to deliver aid, you've got to give some concessions in terms of
And the question is, how many concessions? I don't think
over time that apparently too many concessions.
Whether UNRWA merely did what was.
I think the timing of that was
well,
what's creating a sense of skepticism. Initially, there was shock at the reports, and then I think skepticism starting to seep in when people realize that, well, that's just a day after the ICJ verdict came out.
No, it's obvious that those are considerations which people make when to publish and when to publish what. I mean, the 12 UNRWA people, you know what? That's like a 0.01% of the labor for the UNRWA labor force. But there were UNRWA's involvement in this or that way was established before. Lots of the stuff. Lots of weapons were found in UNRWA schools, in UNRWA bags, in UNRWA boxes, in UNRWA facilities. So,
and look, I mean, I live in a society where bribery and corruption are not tolerated. So they happen in very dark places, and rarely does it come out. But then as you travel around the world, you realize that in some countries, it's the norm. It's expected. The bribery and corruption is just part of doing business. I don't know what it's like in Israel, but certainly in the US, I think there's not as much as Australia, but there is a strong element of corruption, and bribery needs to be stamped out and pulled out.
Now we're generally not a corrupt country, although corruption is increasing, if ever so slowly. Also in itself.
The Middle East is certainly a bribery and corruption region.
Okay. And also, I do wonder if Hamas storing things in UNRWA places specifically is part of the intent, because there are leadership of Hamas that want to mix that basically want to make it maximally difficult in a humanitarian sense to attack the Palestinians. People call this human shields.
Okay, I get a feeling we're running out of time.
Okay.
Yes.
And there's certainly a lot more we could talk about, so maybe we can pick this up again next week.
Yep. Okay.
Thanks, Emmanuel.
Signing off. Take care. Good to see you again.
You too. Rebecca, really good to see you.
Yeah. Good to see you again. Nice talking with you, and thank you.
Talk soon.
Bye.
I got to stop this, don't I?
Yep.
Trying to work out how to do that.
Signing off from FederationX.